Hi, everybody. I'm Molly Thomas. I'm a Canadian journalist, TV and radio host. I've done some podcasting work and some writing, and I'm based in Toronto. And I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but it's so nice to be able to be a part of this lecture series. Thank you to the Afghan Journalist Support Organization for putting these together, and I hope that journalists around the world will band together and friends of people from Afghanistan are helping you in your journey wherever that this may find you. I am a journalist who deeply cares about social justice issues. It has been a staple of my career, doing work in different parts of the world. And really, the last year, my focus has been on Afghanistan. Many of you, of course, will know that Canada has a deep history with Afghanistan. It was our longest military mission, and we were deeply invested in that country, deeply invested in paving the way for human rights, paving the way for women and girls to be journalists, paving the way for educational opportunities. And as we know, so much of that has crumbled over the last few years. And so I thought as I was looking through the news in Canada that we weren't getting enough of stories on the ground. We weren't getting enough voices from people like you. We weren't hearing it. And so I pitched the Michener Deakin Fellowship, which is one of the biggest fellowships in our country, and it's given out by the Governor General. There she is. Mary Simon is our Governor General there, and was really honored to be given the Michener Award last year to look into the loss of school for women and girls since the Taliban takeover. What have the lives been like? Where are they at? Just to get more of this of your stories into the headlines. And so that's been my focus the last, I would say, year and a half. So I've spoken with Afghan women and girls in Afghanistan. I was on the ground in Pakistan. I've spoken to women and girls that are have fled all over the region, as well as people that are in Western countries on this side of the world. And so it's been a real honor and pleasure to understand your stories and to try to just be a part of the big storytelling arm that all of us are a part of, to try to keep these stories in the headlines, to keep people in the know, and to make sure that people do not forget about Afghanistan. I will tell you, I've talked to a lot of Canadian soldiers, men and women that fought over there for many years, and there's so much love that they have for the people of Afghanistan, and so much pain for what has happened over the last few years. And so I don't think that they would be very pleased, that I get some kind of a connection point with you and to share, how much they care so deeply about the work that they did there and the people that they met, the Afghans that they worked with, the interpreters, and everyone that was a part of the mission. And so, yeah, this is not an Afghan issue. This is very much a Canadian issue of us keeping Afghanistan in the headlines and knowing what's happening in your country. I love, by the way, Afghan food, Afghan bread. You could bring me some bolani, kabuli palau. I have had a chance to partake in some of your great food with Afghans. So yes, big fan of the food. Um, and one of the big projects that I worked on this year from that fellowship was a podcast series. And so in it, you will meet three young women who are in Pakistan and what their lives look like after the Taliban takeover. And this was one big part of my fellowship, to put something big, a little bit lengthier in journalism, a little bit more nuanced into the Canadian news media. And so if you want to check that out, it's on Canada Land. Be aware, this is, of course, a view for Canadians, for people that are just being reminded again of Afghanistan. And so for many of you, of course, the nuances, the country, the deep history. And that's not what necessarily our podcast aims to do, but it does hope and aim to have more Canadians engaged and more Canadians reminded of the people that are affected, and ask what our role is in it. So if you're interested, you can find that 3-part podcast, Dear Taliban, anywhere you find your podcast. This is one of my favorite photos from the UN of Afghan journalists hard at work before the Taliban takeover. I just want to say that for everyone listening to this call, that you are all resilient, especially the women journalists. You are resilient. You're heroes, you're warriors, your work matters, your voices matter. And I hope that in this session, as I impart my very little knowledge, that you can take something away from it and that you can apply it to your own storytelling, because we need more Afghan stories in the world, especially for the people that are in Afghanistan. It's limited. As you know, news budgets around the world are shrinking. And we need the people that are from the country telling those stories themselves. And so I hope that I can do my very best to impart some knowledge about media strategy today. So what is strategy? You may be thinking. Strategy in the most basic form is planning for results. Okay. You want to be thinking about, how do I approach storytelling? Now, I know that a lot of people listening are in different situations. Some people in Afghanistan, obviously, that's a very hostile environment to writing freely about what's going on. Some of you are in exile or refugees in the region. That also has, certain barriers that might prevent you from wanting to speak out or to write with your own name in it. So I understand that. And yet some of you are in, Western countries where you do have the ability to tap right in and put your name on a byline, and you feel like you would be safe or your family would be safe. So I know everybody is in a different situation. And so as you're listening to the strategy, keep that in mind, because it will be different for every situation. But this is some broad steps about ways to think about media. So for me, I'll give you an example. I got that fellowship last June, and I was thinking, what are ways in which I can do this project? So I wanted a big project. I wanted a series or a documentary or something that had a little bit more substance. And then I wanted to create some smaller feature pieces with it. That can be audio, that could be TV, that could be digital, that could be, value add in multiple ways, radio. So it's trying to think through those things in your head so that when you get on the ground or you start talking to people, you have an idea of where those stories might have a chance to live. And so that strategy is really just planning for the results that you want. Let me just take a look at my notes. So what I would say right off the hop is that, depending on where you are, and you're going to be connecting with news editors or publications or radio stations or TV places you want to freelance your work, they need to see some of your work from before. So I know many of you have been journalists in Afghanistan. Even if you're not working right now, I'm sure you have some work, writing, links to TV pieces, links to radio pieces. They're all really important. And what I would say is, it would be great to create a personal website just to start. Put some basic things in there, your name, your bio. You want to have information that tells me something about you, just that, like that golden nugget of something that tells me who you are, what you're passionate about, what areas that you cover. And then you want to think about your links to your work, maybe a couple photos in there. Let me just turn this off here. A couple photos in there might help for people to understand your brand. And there's a variety of website builders you can use. You can see them there, a few that I've linked there, and you can take a look at my website if that's helpful at all. But I think when you are approaching editors, when you're pitching a story, you need to have something that you can push those editors to. They need to trust that you've done this before. They can look at your work, they can look at the writing and say, yes, this person can deliver. So if you can spend some time gathering those pieces, finding those links from your old news stations, like seeing what you can do to create a website that exposes who you are, I think that that's a great idea. Now, for those of you that need to be very careful about your identity, of course, this is not a good idea. You want to be talking with editors about using pseudonyms, about basically writing under a different name or writing with a journalist from that outlet, so that you are protected, your family is protected. But for those that are in places that are safe and you can write freely, the website is the first place to start. So this is one of my favorite quotes. It's from Louis Pasteur. It says, "Chance favors the prepared mind." And so, sometimes in journalism, we can't always prepare, of course. We're responding to breaking news. We're on the scene. We just tell you as we go. But I think if you're thinking about freelancing and multiple ways you can tell stories, you want to be as prepared as possible. You want to be thinking strategically so you don't waste your time, editors are not wasting their time, and that you can get, at least some ideas, some stories out into the marketplace as the year go. So here is my advice for you when you're media planning. You can ask yourselves these 4 questions, okay? First of all, what do I want to do? Broadly, what do you want to do? Number 2, how do I want to grow? These are areas that you yourself would like to see growth, let's say over the next 6 months, the next year. Thirdly, ask yourself, am I able to scale? Meaning, can I take this story and put it through multiple mediums? And then evaluate the outcomes, because you want to look back and say, did that work? Did that not work? So that when you go at your next year, you're a little bit better prepared. So when you think about what you want to do, you always have to be thinking short term versus long term. Okay. Long terms are going to be your big pieces. That's the podcast series that I put out. That took, basically over a year to put together, multiple countries, travel, logistics, make hostile training, making sure everyone's safe. So that's the long term. But what are those short stories that you might be able to hit in the interim? Maybe a short feature, a news piece, interviewing people quickly about something, that's currently happening. So you can do both at the same time, even if you go on a reporting trip or you're talking to people in your country, but you always have to be thinking about, what's my long-term project? How much time do I want to allocate versus a short term that you can kind of do on the daily and supplement your project. So this is what you can ask yourself. What type of story am I trying to do? In today's day and age, most of us are multimedia journalists. You have the ability to move between different mediums, and you want to do that as much as possible with your storytelling. It's going to really affect whether it's a short-term project or a long-term project. But if you're getting things that only you're getting and you're not seeing in other media outlets, then it's a good opportunity to use it multiple places. As you read international coverage, I'm sure you're watching the world cover Afghanistan or the bylines that come up. Ask yourself, what is not being covered? What is not being covered that you see in your country every day? For the Afghan journalists in different parts of Afghanistan, what are you seeing that has no coverage? That is your role. That's where you will shine, because you have this inside view, you have the cultural knowledge, you know the language, you can travel, safely, you have to be careful, but you can move around to a certain extent. And I think that you need to really, that is your strength. That's your superpower. And even if we as foreign journalists come in and try to tell a story, we're never going to tell it as good as you can. So I hope that you really take that superpower and think about, how can I add value to the conversation that's out there? So the big thing that you want to do when you say, what is my story? You have to think about, what is my news hook? We all know in journalism, probably what a news hook is. It's basically, why does this story have to go right now? When you call an editor, when you talk to a producer, they'll say, who cares? Why right now? Why? You guys know that question. And so you have to think about the big news headlines or the dates that are going to be coming up that will help defend why it has to go right now. So for an example, we're coming up to August 15th, 2024. That's 3 years since the Taliban takeover. That is a great day and opportunity to get stories of Afghanistan out there, because the world is going to reflect and come back to that anniversary, especially the countries that were involved in that international coalition. There's a vested interest to do something that day. So is there a way that you can pitch outlets ahead of that to give them an inside view, especially if you are in Afghanistan? Other ideas of news hooks, for me, I was doing stories on the loss of school for women and girls. So, think about the first day of classes in Afghanistan, the first day of exams for women and girls when that they're missing, new laws that change for women and girls, anything like that that's a news hook. That's, oh, people around the world might pay attention to this. So that's an opportunity for you to pitch and say, yes, this is something that I can do. This is something that I can get done. And what are the best stories? The best stories need to have a human angle. They need to have somebody that can bring the bigger issue to life. They're a microcosm, a small part of showing you the bigger picture. And so, take some time to find that person. Don't just interview anyone. Who is the person that can illuminate what you're trying to tell? Who is the person who is passionate, who can convey what you're trying to say? If you're working in broadcast or you're working in radio, TV, podcast, it's so important to find people that can communicate well. In print writing, you can write around them, right? They may not be the best communicator, but you can use your writing to shape it. In TV, in radio, in podcast, in digital, if you want to drive that story, you need to have people that can communicate, that can show you insight into their world in some way. So think about that as you're putting your story together. So first, human angle. If you have some new data, is there a survey that you could have done? Is there a new study done in the country people may not know about? Is there new data coming out, that you think is unbelievable coming out from the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan that doesn't correspond with what you're seeing in the streets? Great opportunity. You want that new data. That is a great part of a pitch, saying, I have something new to bring to the table. And think about, as you're writing, to bring in your expertise, that superpower I talked about, that nuance, that cultural nuance into your writing. You are seeing the country if you're in Afghanistan. You know what it's like, for women that can't leave their homes, for women that feel scared when they walk in the streets and they, see a Taliban member. You know what that's like. What is life like through a veil when you were used to growing up and maybe you didn't have to wear the entire burqa before? Bring us into that world and try to infuse that into your writing. And you can talk with your editor about this, especially because it's such a personal experience. You can see if there's ways beyond a traditional news piece that you can write it a little bit, some in the first person, or maybe you do a news piece and then you supplement it with like a personal essay. There might be different opportunities if you think about how you can bring your personal experience to the table. So human angle, some new data for the story is great. And yeah, and that cultural nuance, I would say, are very key parts. And then the news hook. You want the news hook and you want to be ahead of it. So with that news hook, you got to be thinking, when are those moments in the year? So we're coming up to August 15th, perfect example. This is what you will send to an editor, okay? First of all, you say, what am I sending? You're sending maximum. Very, very clear on this. Maximum 1 page. If you can do this in half a page, even better, okay? Especially if it's just a news story, it's a quick, like a 500 words, you can do this in half a page. You need to tell that editor in the email, who is the story about? What is the story about? Where are you going to take the reader, the listener? When are you able to do it? When is it happening? And why? Why is it important, right? And in there, drop some kind of golden nugget. If you have an incredible woman speaking about her experience or describing the world that's now been created for her, give the editor a little nugget, like, I have this amazing firsthand story of, and just give them enough that it teases them, that they are interested or intrigued. And then just leave your contact information, okay? Like email, phone number, and that link to that website so that they can go and see, who is this journalist? What have they done before? If you haven't done any work before and you just want to start journalism, which is totally possible, I would suggest, creating your own stories now. No one's stopping you. I mean, we have all these social media channels. We have such great ways of interacting with the world, YouTube, WhatsApp groups. Figure out ways to start to tell stories. So if you want to go out and tell a story, and you can take your phone out and record people, take your phone out, record people. You want to tell a TV story? Take your phone out. Take your phone out and record the streets. You want to get the hustle and bustle. Make sure you're in horizontal mode, because this is not going to help you. This is for social media. This is for any kind of digital or TV. And if you can go out and, literally interview someone, you have to be careful with sounds behind them, because it can be really loud. So I would say pull that person into a quieter place, especially if you're not working with a mic. But a lot of phones have very powerful audio on it. So you could just record someone and then tell the TV story in pictures. What do I need? Do I need to show a street? Do I need to show, women in burqas walking down the street? Do I need to show the loneliness that exists? Do I need to show a home, to show someone like confined in there? You're visually thinking through the story. So you can, train yourself to become a journalist. You can look at other journalists, how they tell stories, and you have some amazing, amazing technology to work with. So it's a great idea to utilize that. And when? Okay, so when do you pitch? I would say at minimum you send out maybe, because again, I'm assuming that editors don't know you if you're trying to pitch to new outlets. Maybe 1 to 2 weeks before for a news piece. So if it's like a 500 word news piece, or something is happening, or you have some insight or exclusive, maybe 1 to 2 weeks before, send that one page. Okay, who, what, where, when, why, all the information I just went through. And then if they don't get back to you, maybe follow up like a couple days before, or you can even call if you're in Afghanistan, or the news station there. Call the newsroom. But if it's an international newsroom, I think generally the emails are the best way to go, because if they're not interested, they won't answer. But if they are, they will get back to you. But you could follow up by email again. Hey, I sent this pitch last week. Just wanted to see if you saw it. Try one more time. If it's a bigger piece, if it's a documentary, if it's a feature, if it's a podcast, that's going to take time. Okay, magazine feature. I would pitch that. That can be anywhere from 2 to 3 months before you want that to air. So if you're thinking of that news hook in your mind, if it's August 15th, for example, take it back 2 to 3 months. And some, as you look at the different outlets, you want to read up on the news sites, you want to read up about, the magazine you want to pitch to. And they usually have a page that says, here is, our pitching. This is how you pitch. This is who you pitch to. This is what we're looking for. And so on there, you can get an idea. They usually say, we'll get back to you in 6 to 8 weeks if we're interested. So if you send it 2 to 3 months in advance, you're usually okay. Some of them are longer because they might be quarterly, like magazines that come out. So if that's the case, then maybe you might be pitching 6 months out. But think about those news hook events or dates that you can use. And this would be my suggestions for pitching. And I just want to, clarify as well, like I'm an English speaking journalist. I've only, pitched to English speaking outlets. And so that's my limited experience. It might be different for Afghan outlets. It might be a little bit different for things in your region. So, take what I have to say with a grain of salt. But for English speaking outlets, this generally is a decent guideline for you. Does anybody know who that is? I wish you were here with me on this. That is one of our most famous hockey players in Canada. Wayne Gretzky was one of the greatest, or maybe the greatest of all time. And he is loved and made Canada very famous, and we're all very proud of him. And he has a quote that I love, because he says, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And what's amazing about that is you gotta shoot. You've gotta pitch. You've gotta try. And that would be my encouragement to all of you. You are going to send out many pitches that nobody ever gets back to you. That is a normal part of journalism. Okay. So for this project I started working on last year, I think I've sent out roughly around 100 pitches, and I've gotten about 5 features off the ground. Some are still in the works, but it takes a lot. And you know the news cycle as journalists, the world is very focused on other parts of the world right now. There's wars going on in multiple places. It is tough to get these things in the headlines, but they matter. I'm here to tell you they matter. You matter. Your stories matter. We just have to empower you to get to places where you keep pitching, keep putting it in, keep going back until you can establish a relationship with an editor, get one piece off the ground, because it just takes one piece of great journalism for people to trust you, to know your name, to know your brand, and say, hey, this is happening. For example, something's happening in Afghanistan and they call you, can you go do this? That's who you want to be, right? And when you pitch them, they sit up because they remember how good your work is. That's what we want to aim towards. So you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. That's the Wayne Gretzky quote from Canada for you. Pitch, 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 pitch. And get ready for the number one question they'll ask you. Anyone know? Who cares? Who cares? Don't get offended by that. Don't get offended. It's your job to convince them to care. That's your job. So go in prepared for that pitch, know what you're talking about, know who the human angle is, know who the cultural nuance you're going to bring, know the golden nugget that you want, know the new data you're bringing, and then you'll be equipped. You'll be good. Okay, next question you want to ask yourself is, what do I want to do? Okay, what's my short-term goals? What are my long-term goals? And when you think about that, you have to think about which outlets. So I generally say if you're going to pitch places, you got to know where you're pitching. So why do I want to pitch to the BBC? Why do I want to pitch to Al Jazeera? Why do I want to pitch? Like, you got to know the programs you're pitching to. You can't just pitch blindly. So you don't want to send out 100 of the same pitch to every single organization. You got to say, okay, the BBC likes these infographic pitches. They like pictures and then like maybe a little video. So I'm going to cater this pitch to them. And then, for a podcast series, they like a lot of sound and audio. And so how can I incorporate that for them? So really knowing the outlet that you want to target, making your pitch as specific as possible is going to help you, because it tells an editor that you know the work, you've read their work, or you've listened to their work, you've watched their work, and you respect it. And so when you come to pitch, you know why you're pitching them. One thing that I would suggest is co-productions. So thinking about the journalists that are already out there that have been talking about Afghanistan, thinking about from any country, who is already advocating for Afghanistan? Who can I maybe partner with? Because if you don't have a lot of journalism experience, or you don't have all the links, maybe some of you are in places where you can't have, like, those links were back in Afghanistan and you've left. So it makes it hard to access your content. One great way is to see if you could bridge a partnership with a journalist that already cares about Afghanistan. So, do some Google searches, figure out for some of the biggest outlets in the world who writes, who speaks about this, who cares about it. And then maybe you could, see if, like, hey, I want to do this. What do you think if we work together? And kind of pitch it as both of you working on the story. And so in that way, the editor can say, okay, here's a journalist from my bureau that I know loves this country and has done work that our audience knows. And here's a journalist in Afghanistan who can bring such value on the ground. And then both of your names, if you want, can be there, or you can create something. There's a really great podcast called Inside Kabul. It was done by French journalists. And essentially it's the stories of young women after the Taliban takeover, like sharing their messages about how their lives were changing after the Taliban take over the last few years. Then the French journalists were able to take those messages and turn them into bigger storytelling. And then you hear all of those voices infused. And sometimes that's a really great way to get more content out, because they already have a touch point with their editors. So I would really think about who are your favorite journalists around the world, reach out to them, see if you can make contact. And there's so many ways to find journalists on Twitter, on social media. Most people love to talk about what they do. And if you explain what you hope to do, or you have a very clear pitch, again, you want to be very clear on those things, they might be interested and they might be great. And then I would also think about, who do I want to contact? Who are who, like, start making a list. If on the BBC, this program, I want to contact this person, and like literally just start making the long lists around the world of the places you are thinking about for short-term projects and long-term projects. Oh, there it is. What type of story, which outlet, co-productions, are they possible, and who are the contacts? I think this part of your strategy is really important because you always want to ask yourself, how do I want to grow? How do I want to get better this year? Um, don't be so hard on yourself. If you were in a newsroom and your country wasn't, taken over by people and you weren't in exile or whatever the story is, you know, you would be working and probably pumping out content every day. Life for many Afghan people around the world is very difficult right now. And, you have to have grace for yourself too, and understanding that for right now, that life may not be the reality. And so when you set these goals of how you want to grow, also be realistic, in what you're facing. So I would say, think about those bigger picture things. Do I want to be a stronger writer by the end of the year? Do I want to work in different mediums? Meaning, I worked in TV. Maybe I want to try some radio. Maybe I want to try some writing. Maybe I want to try some more digital content. Can I get my social media feeds up and moving? Maybe your goal is just to make contacts with 3 editors this year. 3 editors that know my name, that know the things that I care about, that would be interested in my pitches. That's so important. Even for me as a journalist in Canada, like, making those relationships is really, really important. And then I would say the co-producing with other journalists, also worth thinking about. Is there one journalist this year I could connect with and maybe talk about something for the future? Remember, if you're thinking of a longer form piece, it may not be for years that you start creating something, but that relationship might start today. Oh, did I miss one? Oh yeah. So money. Money, money, money. Okay, money is always an issue, no matter where you are as a journalist in the world. But there are some fellowships that may be able to help you, and I think it's worth looking into them. The biggest one is the International Women's Media Foundation Fund for women journalists. It is a fund for journalists around the world. It's fantastic. It's basically created to help women tell stories and give them the opportunity when they may not have the money. So people, especially in Afghanistan, women, if you have a great pitch, if you have something unique, if you're just like, if only I had the money, please check out that link and look into it. They have a rolling fund throughout the year. The pitch, they ask you a lot. It's not a one-page pitch. This is for a big project. These are big projects. These are not small news stories. So, you really have to develop your idea. You got to think through, make calls. You got to have like all the people you want to talk to, like all of that needs to be done for a great pitch, and you want to put as much effort as you can. And I think they give up to $10,000 for journalists, and also like hostile training advice and programming as well. So if you feel like your life could be in danger, that is always great additional training to have. The Noor Fellowship Program is investigative work. So if you want to do a deep dive, maybe you've done a lot of journalism, that you came from Afghanistan, you're somewhere else in the world, that is something that has been very successful. And then I was reading about the Media in Cooperation and Transition Program. They also have some funding available. So those are just a few that I looked at. There are definitely more opportunities out there. Just make sure when you read through those fellowships that you carefully read through the criteria before you send in a pitch, okay? Be very, very careful. Am I eligible? Like, depending on what country I'm in, what kind of a story do I need? Just make sure that you mark every single box, because if you're not eligible, you won't get looked at, and you'll put so much work into this, and it's not worth the time. But if you are, and you can put that story together, it might be the difference between you being able to do your story or not. Okay, this is an important one. Am I able to scale? So thinking about similar storylines that you can use in different mediums. So can I take this story and send it 5, 6, 7, 10 different ways? I would encourage you, if you can, this would be great. One of the things you have to be careful on is when if one editor says yes, you got to look at your contract and see if the contract says anything about not sharing that story with anyone else. Now, I'm not talking about plagiarizing the story. If you tell one story, you need to make sure that you shift the language and shift the tone and add something new to the next medium that you work with. So I'm not saying do the story the exact same way. I'm saying, are there different ways of telling the story from someone that is a great character, or someone that tells you something that is so interesting, or takes you somewhere that is so interesting. So just make sure if you sign any of the contracts, if you get your first pitch off the ground, they say yes. Let's say the BBC says yes, we'll take this pitch. Just make sure when you sign that you read everything through, in case sometimes they will say we don't, this would be an exclusive. Then that's an exclusive. That means that's it. That's the only place. But many times, like most of the time, they're not going to do that necessarily. And so you could maybe put it into, a newspaper that Afghans would read, maybe in your own language. And then maybe you could do one for an English speaking place, or maybe you could do one for, I know that Afghans speak so many different languages. You guys are so talented and intelligent. There might be a variety of platforms for you to utilize, is what I would say. So one thing in my project that I did, this was one of my hopeful stories. This is Nigara Shaheen. Some of you may know her. She just competed in the Olympics for the refugee Olympic team. This is the second time, and she is Afghan. She was a refugee that went to Pakistan as a young woman and then ended up back in Pakistan as a refugee a second time. Long story short, she ends up in Canada and got to go to the Olympics. So she was just there. She's a lovely, wonderful woman. And so I did a feature for her for the Toronto Star, which is one of our biggest newspapers in Canada. And I was able to, tell her whole backstory and get into like the nuances of her family and culture a little bit more, because it was a nicer, longer feature. And then I took that same story and I had this great audio because I had interviewed her on a mic, and I was able to have this conversation with her. So I turned that into a radio feature, because all of a sudden you hear the training in her training facility, the judo that she's playing. You could hear the people running. All of that makes for a great radio story. And then I cut a digital piece as well. So you have almost like digital kind of TV piece that gives people an idea into her life, and they get to meet her and see her and see that. So, combining those different things, that's just one story. That's just one story told different ways. And as long as there's no exclusivity granted to any of the outlets, you can take that one story and move it in many ways. I know TV, for people that had come from TV and feel like, maybe they're refugees in another country, or they've moved to another country, they feel like, I don't have a TV camera, I don't have a TV crew. Again, your phone is your best friend. There are some inexpensive options you could invest in. Again, if you apply for those fellowships, got some funding. I have, a smart lav that plugs right into my iPhone, so I could use that as a mic when I'm recording on my iPhone. So if I was doing like a stand up to myself, you just put your phone, or you put your phone out, sorry, horizontally, and you can record yourself. You could get like a little ring light on the top of your phone if you want a little bit more light on your face. There's a lot that you can do for not very much money. I also bought a smart rig, which is essentially serves like a baby tripod, but it's just something you hold. I wish I don't have it assembled. I should have brought it, but essentially it takes like 10 minutes to assemble, and it gives you such balance. If you're taking video, let's say out in the streets, or you're interviewing someone, you could set it up somewhere and it just takes great video. And most people's phones are shooting in 4K, so you actually get pretty good video. So if you have audio on someone, you have the phone that has a clear picture, you're actually in pretty good shape to create, definitely for something for digital, but possibly something for TV too. And that smart rig, the thing that I hold, is, I want to say it's around like $400, somewhere $300 to $400. And so those of you, especially that are in Western countries that can access that, you should look into that, because, if you have access to some money or a fellowship, you could easily get that and start creating yourself, right? So that is an option for you. So what I would say about your story, if you have a great story, own it and see how many places that you can spit it out. All right, so evaluating your outcomes. I would say every few months or every 6 months, try to take a look back and evaluate your pitches sent versus the ones that aired. Because usually when you get pick up on one or two, you can look back and say, why did that one work? Remember, because you're making your pitches unique for every outlet. I think you can look back and say, did my relationship with editors get better? Did I meet one editor this year that's interested in my work? And if so, like that's great. One of the things when you're working with an editor is you're going to write your story and send it, and they may completely write it back and say, I don't like this, move this, change this. Don't be offended by that. That's where the best journalism comes from. It comes from your instinct, their instincts. And so a great relationship with an editor is the ability to take feedback, the ability for you to say, no, no, this is really important. Please keep it in because, and for both of you to respect each other enough to come to the best story. So if you can build a relationship with a few editors this year, that is a really strong an important step as a freelancer. You can ask, are my co-productions working? Do I feel valued? Sometimes you work with foreign journalists and they can take over the story. You want to make sure that what you're doing matters and that you clearly outline, if I work with you on this, my name will be here, or maybe you don't want your name, my name will not be here. But how you want to feel acknowledged, how you want to feel valued, I think is really important too. So you can evaluate if it's a good relationship or not, and then determine what you want to do. I think you should always ask yourself, like, what are my strongest mediums, right? If you did radio and you did digital, maybe your radio is much stronger. Just ways that you can think about how to improve, and then also what you really like. Because if we're doing things that we like, we're happier. And so I think, you can also kind of hone in and see what is what's the best option for you going forward. And then the question you always ask, what can I do that no one else can? What can I do that no one else can? Or what's a new angle I can bring to this? And so as you're living your life, wherever you are living as Afghans, always ask that as a journalist, what can I do that no one else can? What do I see that no one else is seeing? And then bring that onto your newspaper, bring that to your TV station, bring that to your radio station. I just want to, talk about the work environment in Afghanistan because, all of these things are involved, you interviewing people and writing and putting stories out there that obviously the Taliban are not going to like. And so, um, I just want to recognize that the work environment in Afghanistan is so difficult. And I have never been to Afghanistan. If you listen to my podcast, Dear Taliban, you'll hear my story and how I tried so hard to come to Afghanistan, um, and how it just didn't work out. And I hope one day I will get there. But I've learned a lot from Afghans that have told me from inside the country or people that are outside about your wonderful country. But, in terms of evaluating the work environment, I can only tell you the safety protocols that I've been told, to give you some ideas, but you are the people that live in the country. Those of you that live there, you should teach this session because what you know about your country, how to navigate around, armed guards, how to deal with crowds, how to get yourself to say, you know better than me. So take everything I say with only so much, but I'll give you a little bit of what I have just generally learned for navigating countries that might be a little bit tricky. So crowds, let's say you're going to cover a protest, you're going out as a woman and you're a little worried. I think when you're covering a protest or march where there's hundreds, maybe thousands of people, you have to be very cognizant all the time of how you exit. So don't just go wading through the crowd to talk to anyone. If it's a big enough group, people will be circling and moving. So keep yourself in a position that you can get to a car, you can exit through, a street, that you have even a safe house that you can get to. You want to always be thinking about these things. As a woman, I wouldn't advise that you go out by, like, I know many of you can't go out by yourself in Afghanistan, but to have somebody, a brother, uncle, someone around that's, looking out for you, that is able to vouch for you if there's any problems, and that they and you are very close proximity, because in those areas you can get separated very quickly. So I would always recommend that. And if you have a car, and you're thinking about your exit if there's a problem, always park your vehicles facing the direction you want to go. Okay, don't trust the vehicle to have to maneuver and turn around. You don't want to be dealing with that if there's chaos, if there's problems. You want to be able to get in the car and go. So always park the direction you want to leave. Um, one of our biggest skills that we have to learn as journalists is to read body language, right? It's to see, if people are becoming aggressive, if people are offended by what you're saying. And so if you're seeing that as you're interviewing someone, be mindful. Um, your story is not worth your life. And always be mindful of what's happening around you. And that's why it's always great to have a friend, a brother, someone around, or a couple people around to be watching if you're talking to people. And this is really in any country, I would say, but especially in places that are a little bit more hostile or can be. Okay, here's some of the vulnerabilities that you have to think about as a journalist, not only for yourself, but for every person that you're interviewing. So this is really for the journalists in Afghanistan or in the region where they fear that being a journalist is going to put them in danger. Um, be cognizant of all of your recorded materials. Okay, so I know as journalists, we go get audio, we get video, we use our phones. Like that's how we document history. But at the same time, it can put you in a very difficult situation if someone arrests you or takes away your devices. So I would say with your phones, for example, if you're going out to a busy crowd or somewhere where you think that you might get some problems, take off your Face ID because it just takes someone to put their phone up to you and it just unlocks, because that would put you in a position where they have access to all your information. So make sure there's an actual number code that you have to put in. If there's sensitive material where you've interviewed somebody or you've been somewhere that you think might cause problems, put it in the hidden folder where it's locked and you can only access this if you have a code. So don't just leave that on your iPhone because it's very easy to grab your phone away from you and take a look at what's on your phone. Notebooks as well. You have to be very careful. When I interview people that are worried about their lives or their safety, if I make notes, I sometimes even refrain, but if I make notes, it's like jot form abbreviations that only I would understand. Definitely not putting down names, not putting down addresses, not having a list of, if you get in with a driver and you're going out for the day to do your story, not having a list of every place that you're going to stop. Like that driver, you're going to tell them on a need to know basis. We are now going to this place, nothing else. We are now going to this place. You don't need to give the entire itinerary because you never know. You have to be careful as a journalist when you're doing stories of yourself and people that are vulnerable because you want to keep them safe and you want to take away any risk that you could face. In terms of like kidnap prevention, I would say be really careful about if you're doing a story that involves you going to the same place every day, just of your routines. Like don't make your routines predictable. So don't walk the exact same path at the same time. Don't stop at the same store at the same time. You got to create some variation so that you are protecting the people that you're going to talk to. Social media is a big one, okay? I know we all love to share our lives with the world, but we have to be cognizant that people can find this information. So what you post on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever you're using, TikTok, be very mindful of what your names are on there, how people can link back to you. If you have a location setting on where people can find you, you have to be so careful what you post online, especially if you are in Afghanistan. I mean, the joy of doing a media strategy or trying to tell these stories is that you meet amazing, amazing people. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the people I met on my trip to Pakistan. So on the far left-hand corner, you can see Rabina. She's a teenager who her family had to flee to Pakistan, and she's a teenager that started this amazing program called Girls on a Path for Change. And she was a refugee herself with her family, waiting in Pakistan to see if they could find a country to go to. And she thought, I can help other girls while I'm sitting here. and her English is great. She learned English mostly through YouTube videos and her family. And she started this program where girls can jump on and learn English from volunteer teachers around the world. And she's had 500 women and girls jump onto these classes. She's an amazing, amazing woman. So if you want to check that out, that's Girl on a Path for Change. Underneath, you can see a classroom there. This is a classroom for refugees. You see those young women in that classroom. And they all spoke multiple languages, very smart girls. And this was started by the teachers here at the top right-hand side. So these are two teachers who were refugees themselves in Pakistan and said, we're just sitting here, so why don't we help people? And so they decided to start a school for refugees in Pakistan, different ages, different stages, and their goal, and they're also doing online classes. So their goal is to have thousands of students participating, whether they're in the classroom or they're actually online. So it's a pretty cool school, and they have some ties to Canada, which I was pretty proud of. So that was a really neat experience. Right in the middle, you see Muhammad and his grandson. So Muhammad was a former interpreter who worked with Canada when our mission was there. And um, he's just such a lovely man that spent years with his family waiting on the Canadian government to approve their visas. And so I happened to be there and meet with him when I was in Pakistan and just hear, the ways he loves Canada and just the frustrations of trying to get to Canada. And so that was him and his little grandson. And he's since moved with his family to Alberta, Canada. If you've heard of Alberta, it's where the big, big Rocky Mountains are. So that's Mohammed. And in this corner, you see these beautiful women, Zora and Nargis. These are both human rights activists from Afghanistan, women who protested against the Taliban, who put their lives and their faces out there and said, with this, something needs to change. And so their lives were in danger when the Taliban took over fully. And so they fled with their families, and they are in Pakistan. And so they share their stories too. So these people are so lovely. And you'll know when you tell these stories how important they are, because you will meet these people, and these are maybe your brothers or cousins or sisters. Like, these people more than any of us could. And that's what makes, the strategy, the work, the pitches getting turned down, the repitching worth it, because these people stories matter. You matter. So here is some of my Afghan work if you're interested. Just some links there if it helps you understand a little bit more of the work that I have done and I continue to do. It gives you a little bit of the stories that I'm interested in, and I'll continue to do stories because I really think that we need to keep Afghanistan in the headlines. So if you're interested, take a look. Feel free to take a look. And that's everything for me. I just wanted to thank you all for listening. And hopefully next time I can meet some of you in person. And good luck with the media strategies and ways of getting re-involved in this profession that you love. Journalism is a very powerful tool. Christiane Amanpour has said it is, the weapon that changes the world. And I truly believe that as well. It's such an important part of how we see the world, and you have an important role in it. And so I know it can be discouraging, and I'm sure, none of us can understand what all of you have gone through, but I just want to encourage you to keep pitching, keep putting your stories out there. And I look forward to reading bylines with many, many Afghan names for years to come. All right, folks, I'll leave you there. Have a great day. Thank you to the Afghan Journalists Association for bringing me in.